Thanks for joining us on this panel on the tech stack for CMMC. I'm Randy Batat. I'm a co-founder and CEO of PreVeil, and we have a great set of panelists today. Nathan Regola from Regola, and Scott Singer from Cyber9, Kelly Kendall from KNC Strategic Services, and Travis Goldbach from AWS. Today, we're going to examine a few different subjects, starting with the structure of typical IT installations and the considerations around compliance. We'll also touch on scoping and the notion of enclaves, where to scope your CMMC boundary. We'll talk about considerations of on-prem versus cloud versus hybrid deployments. And finally, we'll touch on deploying cloud-based enterprise applications. First, I'd like each of our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves. So, Nate, quick minute or two on your background.
Certainly. Nate Regola, I have a PhD in computer science and engineering and a law degree from George Washington University. I'm not licensed to practice law. I always like to add that disclaimer, but did graduate. We are a small C3PO. We lucky to pass assessment on the first time without a POM window. We are using PreVeil. So we were the first authorized C3PO to use PreVeil, and we're enjoying the experience of interacting with customers using the PreVeil platform.
Hi, I'm Scott Singer from Cyber9. We are a C3PAO also, and we have two main lines of practice, one on consulting and one on assessment. We've recently been doing some joint surveillance voluntary assessments, and those obviously, because of the final rule coming out, are going away, but enjoyed doing those.
Thanks, Scott. Kelly?
My name's Kelly Kendall. I'm the CEO and president of KNC Strategic Services. Might sound repetitive, but we're a C3PO as well. We're supposed to be saying we're an authorized C3PO, so we're all authorized. So we're based out of Southern California, Oceanside, Carlsbad area. We've been involved in joint surveillance voluntary assessments, just wrapped up one last week. We're one of the rare West Coast C3POs. There's not very many, so we're looking to do a lot of work. We're already getting contracts for Hawaii and haven't gotten Alaska yet. I heard Scott telling me that he was going up to Alaska, but we've gotten a lot of proposals. So interesting times, but yeah, happy to be here and big fan of PreVeil. Everybody that's involved here know most of them really well, so looking forward to talking with everyone.
Thanks, Kelly. And Travis?
Hey, everyone. I'm Travis Goldbach. I lead our CMMC go-to-market efforts here at AWS. I started at AWS in 2021 to help customers and partners accelerate their DFARS, NIST, and CMMC compliance journey while reducing that level of effort and risk. And prior to AWS, I was a CMMC program lead at one of the top managed security service providers, where I also led a team of cybersecurity consultants with a focus on helping aerospace defense contractors with their cybersecurity programs to meet some of those most stringent cybersecurity and compliance requirements.
Thanks, Travis. I think we're going to have a great high-content session here. Let's start with Nate, and Nate's going to discuss the structure of different kinds of typical installations and what to be thinking about in terms of CMMC compliance and the tech required.
Thank you. So some of these samples kind of come from our reference architecture diagrams, simplified for the presentation. And if you think about working with a C3PAO, one of the first encounters you're probably going to have is a scoping discussion, and they're going to ask for the company, the DIB company, right, to show, or an MSP to show their architecture so they can understand what the boundary of assessment is. And in this example, we're showing that there is no VPN on the endpoints. Certainly companies have passed without a VPN, right? So we're going to show multiple scenarios here. This is a laptop where you have CUI. It's intended to process, for example, content from the PreVeil drive, and those users may be telework users. So we have this, right, in the green showing that the customer is going to have responsibility likely for the security of that device, right? So the MSP is probably not going to manage physical security for the endpoints that are roaming the world, right? So you can look at the legend here for the various boundary diagrams. But this might represent an entire enclave. And so the MSP might be managing the cloud service components, perhaps containing a firewall, a directory service, a SIM, vulnerability scanning, mobile device management, endpoint detection and response. And with the 32 CFR rule, right, FedRAMP is not required for security protection assets. You can see that we have these examples color coded, right? So the vulnerability scanner, the SIM, MDM, directory service, they're all security protection assets in this example. PreVeil is obviously a CUI asset, the PreVeil SaaS. It has FedRAMP moderate equivalents that will get presented to the C3PO, so that's not an issue. And then, of course, the laptop, as I noted, is generally going to be a CUI asset if it's processing, storing, or transmitting CUI. You also may have a smartphone, right? So some companies want to process CUI on a smartphone. That is an option as well. So this would be the sample enclave. Obviously, the internet is not going to be assessed, right? It's shown here as out of scope for assessment. It's in white. The next slide just shows us a slight variation of this with a remote access VPN being extended to the laptop and optional smartphone. So that's an option. So in this scenario, all internet activity is routed through that remote access VPN for logging and other types of monitoring. The next slide expands upon this sort of sample scenarios, right? When you have perhaps a manufacturing company, right, with equipment, right, network printers running on-premise servers, right? So you can see the expansion, right? There's a site-to-site VPN interconnecting the on-premise location with a cloud service. And then obviously, depending on the configuration desired, you can extend the telework users access to the sites. And then the final slide shows multiple sites, right? So in this scenario, you might place your firewall, which is a security protection asset, in the secondary site as well. And those are building your site-to-site VPN back to the cloud service provider, which you may use as a hub, or you could obviously select a physical site as a hub.
Cool. That's a great, really nice overview. I think it kind of helps put things in perspective. Scott, do you want to offer some thoughts on scoping?
Sure. First of all, I just want to really point out that scoping is one of the most important things you're going to do here. And it defines the boundaries for the assessor when they come in to do an assessment. So if you want to, first of all, reduce the amount of things that assessor is going to look at, then it's important to understand and know your scope. So so Nate just showed a couple of different scenarios of scoping. And in the end, right now, there are two main ways to go at this. You can go at it with an enclave, or you can go at it with an enterprise. The enterprise being the scope is your whole company, and enclave being you're scoping that down and you're to only where CUI is stored, processed, or transacted. So that said, in the enclave, he also, Nate, mentioned some things called security protection assets. Well, in the end, it's really important to pull down the DoD's document on scoping. And they just came out with a new version. It's 2.13. 2.13. And what's really good about this is it really defines what all these assets are. So you get controlled CUI assets are the key one, obviously, here. And with a CUI asset, you have to assess all 110 controls and remember 320 assessment objectives. And then with security protection assets, those are assets that provide security functions or capabilities. So think kind of the system admin tools that help provide security for those CUI assets. Then we have a category called contractor risk managed assets. And this is, for example, if you used AWS as your infrastructure as a service and you put a virtual machine up in that cloud and you accessed it from, let's say, a BYOD, a bring your own device, a computer, you can classify that asset as a CRMA, and then you don't have to assess it now against all the 110 controls. So you're limiting, again, your enclave and your scope by that type of strategy. Another strategy you can use is a tool like PreVeil, which is software as a service, and it's using AWS GovCloud as the backend, but it's providing file share and some tools that allow you to do that. So in the end, kind of like circling back on this, and then, Nate also talked about having, on-prem type tools, so you can have specialized assets, and those are, for a level 2, you don't have to assess against all 110 controls. So it's a way to try and help you carve out some of your scope again. So by understanding these different categories, you can much better limit your scope and limit the cost that this is going to take. So I think that's probably enough to cover that.
Great. Thanks for that overview. We may dive into some of this a little bit more deeper, depending time permitting later on. Kelly, you want to touch on thoughts on on-prem versus full cloud versus hybrid deployments and how that, affects consideration of the tech stack?
Absolutely. I think it's a key decision when you're trying to figure out what your ultimate solution is going to be for, trying to meet the requirements is, are you an on-prem, completely 100%, small manufacturing company? Are you a small 5-person, completely virtual team? It really depends on what you are, but most importantly, what you're trying to accomplish for your assessment scope. So your tech stack, your decisions you're making, you can completely stay on-prem. There's pros and cons. You can be completely virtual. There's pros and cons. And you can be hybrid. There's pros and cons. There's no one solution. I think one thing, hopefully everyone's catching here, is there's not one single solution that solves everything, and not one of them that is better than the others. Each of them have their different purposes. So, if you've got a lot invested in your on-prem and, you're 99% on-prem, you might have one other thing that's in the cloud and you're not really trying to transition to the cloud, then you're going to be looking at a lot of the great on-prem solutions that solve the problems. There's a lot of that are out there. But if you try to do a fully virtual, like my company, we're fully virtual. You have home offices, that's it. You don't have an actual infrastructure in homes. So the solutions you're looking at need to be based on what your company structure is, but most importantly, what your assessment scope structure is going to be. Because you might be doing a small enclave that's 5 people and it could be fully virtual. It might not have to have anything on-prem, but it's really trying to determine. I know we have a short amount of talk and I have about 1 million different ideas that I could talk about in this, but it really comes down to, if you're already implementing a lot of different technology, adding another one is not always easy. Trying to find the best way to take the tech stack you currently have and see, what can we do with this? Can it solve the problems, or do we have to add something? If we have to add something, what do we need to add? Is it best to add something that's on-prem? Is it best to add something that's fully virtual? Or can we do some kind of a hybrid approach? Hybrid works really well. I mean, if you think of, it's a stupid analogy, but this is me with my brain, but think of cars. You've got gasoline cars, you've got electric cars. They both have their pros and cons. But if you try to take the electric car and drive across the country, you're probably going to run into some challenges of, running out of power in your electric vehicle. But if you have a hybrid vehicle, it's kind of best of both worlds. You don't get the full electric vehicle advantage. You don't get the full gas advantage, but you get the best of both worlds. Silly analogy, but I drive a hybrid now, so it's on my mind. But I think it does speak volumes to how you can solve problems here. Tech stacks, if you've got a lot invested in it, it's hard to make those decisions as business owners of where to invest the money to get the best bang for your buck. Looking at solutions like PreVeil and solutions like that can really solve a lot of the problems, and to do it in a cost-effective way, that's a very good idea. I'm not just pitching PreVeil too. I mean, I truly have seen it on the assessment side and as a consultant and assessor, so it's a good product.
Thanks. Appreciate your pitching, PreVeil. But Kelly, one more question for you. I think you were pretty clear about, on-prem, if you built a lot of stuff already, you had to be NIST 800-171 compliant already, and you maintain all that. The on-prem makes sense. And if you're, fully virtual, the cloud-only environment, can you maybe offer an example or two outside of the car metaphor where hybrid has been the right choice, and how that kind of played out?
Yeah, very much so. I could give the example of a client of ours that was primarily on-prem forever and didn't really necessarily want to go into a hybrid model. But when it came down to what was going to be needed to meet the requirements, it became more and more apparent that additional solutions were going to be needed. For them, they were on-site Microsoft environment, on-site Active Directory servers and everything. So even that going to a hybrid model where you're using, Active Directory Connect, I can't remember the exact name of it, but where you're connecting now so that your cloud environment, you can take advantage of all of Microsoft's cloud-based tools to supplement your on-prem environment. That right there is just a simple example of the hybrid setup that you kind of can take advantage of the best of both worlds. And for this client, it worked out great. Originally, we've been working with them for many years, and we thought, nope, it's 100% on-prem. But in the end, as we're getting closer and closer to having them fully prepared for the assessment, it became obvious. Some of the requirements were not going to be able to easily be met by having on-prem. And also the decision came into play based on who you are working with. Do you have an MSP? What is their options? What do they have available? What they can do for you? In this scenario, the client has an MSP, and that really drove a lot of the decision making on what to implement and drive to a more hybrid approach where they're kind of transitioning to the cloud, but it was more about just adding some of the cloud tools that can really supplement their on-prem, because on-prem can solve a lot of things. Hybrid can be a good way to go to. You get the best of both worlds, so to speak.
Thank you. Travis, you want to touch a little bit about building enterprise apps in the cloud to be compliant with CMMC?
Yeah, so typically organizations that are moving to the cloud are facing challenges with their on-premise environment. Why? Because it's really the lack of visibility and it's the low degree of automation. So in an on-premise environment, it can be really difficult to know what resources and data that are out there at any given time, who's moving it, who has access to it. And most organizations don't have that level of visibility into their on-premise environment that they need. And without that visibility, it could be really challenging for organizations to secure their infrastructure and their data to meet some of those security and compliance requirements. Another typical challenge is trying to really get rid of those manual processes to remediate issues. Manual processes tend to lead to inconsistent execution, longer wait times, and in most cases, disruption in customer experience. So those two combinations of lack of visibility and low degree of automation makes an organization's ability to move quickly and effectively to secure their on-premise infrastructure really difficult. So now, today, it's really possible to automate many of those basic security tasks by gaining visibility into identifying accurately, monitoring critical assets and data. And with the cloud, it's all made easier so you can stay agile and improve security. So there's two main regions that customers are getting started in before deploying their applications. That's our commercial East-West region and our GovCloud US region. That's where PreVeil is built, our GovCloud US region. Both of those regions are helping organizations meet the CMMC requirements. Within our commercial East-West region, you're able to utilize services that meet the FedRAMP moderate. When going to GovCloud, you're adding in additional compliance capabilities around ITAR restrictions, as well as DoD SRG impact levels and FedRAMP High. But security at AWS really starts with our core region infrastructure, which is custom built for the cloud and designed to meet some of the most stringent security requirements in the world. Our infrastructure is monitored 24/7 to help ensure confidentiality, integrity, and the availability of customer data. And all of that data that's flowing across our network that interconnects with our data centers and regions is automatically encrypted at the physical layer. So before it leaves our secured facilities. So you can build on some of the most secure infrastructure, knowing that you always have control of your data, the availability to encrypt it, move it, and manage retention at any time. So as you are deciding on which region is best for you, you get to start inheriting some of those controls within the CMMC domains around physical protection, media protection, maintenance, And if you're looking at FedRAMP authorizations, contingency planning, environmental controls, those types of things.
Thanks, Travis. Nate, I'm going to kick a question to you here based on questions that I hear from our customers all the time. When thinking about some of these network elements, particularly some of the security protection assets like firewalls, vulnerability scanning, and so forth, and one's trying to pick something in terms of the tech stack, what are some of the considerations that you have to think about with regard to CMMC? Because a lot of times we'll get questions that are like, could you just recommend some things, or we're not quite sure how to check the right boxes. And for example, I've heard from a number of C3PAOs that, the FIPS requirement is something that people get stumbled on or you get stuck on or so forth. But one of the things you bump into and, people need to be thinking about when picking some of these network elements in their IT system.
It's a great question. So FIPS specifically, is not required for security protection assets, since there is no, CUI in and of itself in the security protection asset or security protection data term that is present in the 32 CFR rule. That being said, sometimes people elect to do FIPS on the firewall and VPN if they're not confident of all their CUI flows, right? As an example, they might be printing to a network printer, and the printer traffic is not, validated. So if they're crossing Wi-Fi or, remote access VPN, they don't want to send that CUI unencrypted, because encryption that's not FIPS is considered unencrypted from the government's perspective because of the lack of a FIPS validated certificate. So in those situations, companies may decide to do FIPS on the firewall or VPN to essentially cover themselves, right? That way, if there's a data flow that's discovered in the firewalls in FIPS mode, the remote access VPN is in FIPS mode, they're good. I think a lot about integration. A lot of the CMMC controls are related, right? And they're not necessarily going to be assessed. All of them may not be assessed for security protection assets, right? Because there's this language of relevant on the assessment side. But the government does want people to implement controls for security protection assets, but not necessarily be assessed. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. But I think a lot about the integration. If something is it going to integrate with my log system? Is it going to integrate with my ticket management system? All of those things, right? Because the more special stuff you have to do means the more things you probably have to write up, in your SSP. So the more you can simplify that and integrate that with your ecosystem of other components, likely the cheaper O&M you're going to have, but you ultimately have flexibility to do what you want.
Great. Thank you for that. Scott, could I tip one to you as well? It's a little bit less of a purely technical stack question, but I know a lot of, especially small and medium-sized businesses, have MSPs helping them manage their network, set up and control things. And a lot of the MSPs that they may be using may not be, CMMC compliance experts, and they may not even know what they have to sign up to. Can you offer just some thoughts? Let's say I'm a small, medium-sized business. I've got an MSP helping me manage a bunch of stuff. What do I need? What kind of questions do I need to ask my MSP? What kind of things do I need to expect of them from a compliance standpoint, so what they're doing doesn't push me out in terms of, the things that they may be deploying on my behalf, even to the extent of managing my directory services, vulnerability scanning, all these other kinds of things. Just, a quick cheat sheet for what to ask my MSP so I don't get in trouble.
Well, first of all, do they even know what CMMC is or what NIST 800-171 is? That's probably a good place to start. The second thing is, if they don't understand what a shared responsibility matrix, that's probably time to find another MSP. It's important to understand what they're going to be doing for you. And it's also important to make sure that they understand that they need to be sitting with you when you get audited, assessed by a C3PAO or DIBCAC. They're your partner, and they're going to be needing to be able to answer some of those questions depending on what, you're inheriting from them, from, and the 110 controls. So those are just a smattering of issues. can be an issue. For example, if the MSP wants to do your backups and then have the backups held at their site, then all of a sudden now they're technically a cloud service provider and they need to meet FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. And that can be definitely kind of an issue that you need to be paying attention to. So I think those are kind of some of the key things that I would look for. And those types of things should be part of your contractual agreement that you have with the MSP. Don't sign a contract with an MSP before you put some of those things in the contract.
Great, that's helpful. We only have a couple minutes left. Kelly, I'm just going to ask if you think we've missed anything in this discussion of tech stack, and if there's any other points you think, we need to be, communicating to folks who are, trying to make, hard decisions about what to deploy in order to be compliant here. There's a little bit of an open-ended kind of thing, but I'm just curious if you think that there's something that we really need to emphasize that we missed.
I think it's all about really understanding security protection assets and what they are. Because when you hear security protection asset, I even do this, I think technology. But you really need to understand security protection assets is broken out into three things, which is people, technology, and facilities. So you have security protection assets. They could be people. It might be consultants, your MSPs. You might have technology that could be your security protection asset, or facilities. If you're using data centers, co-location centers, things like that. So really understanding what security protection assets are. And then I think one thing too, I wanted to mention what Scott was talking about is those contracts with your MSP. Make sure that you have an SLA with that MSP that says they will do the things that they're required to do that are part of your assessment. In other words, any of the requirements that are being inherited, your SLA should say that they're doing these things, that they agreed to do these things. And I'm saying that as an example from a JSVA that I saw where there was potentially a challenge. It was resolved, but we didn't see the SLA initially, and that created a lot of issues. The SLA fortunately did have the right information in it. So that SLA between you and any ESP you're using that's going to be a part of this, really critical. And make sure that ESP, as we call them, MSP, MSSP, is willing to participate and help you in your assessment, maybe even agreeing to be there during your assessment, because they're going to have a lot of questions asked by the assessors to them, whether they've been certified or not. I think that's the last thoughts I have.
Great. Perfect. We have reached our time limit. This is really great. I think extremely helpful, just kind of scratching the surface here. I want to thank you all for being on our panel and our participants for joining us.